My gender journey started a long time ago, before I even had the language to express it or fully understand what gender really meant for me. I didn't think I was different to anyone else, as my experience was all I ever knew at the time. It started out as fantasies of being in a different body, of being an animal, a bird, or a cat. I vividly remember watching Thundercats, a popular 80s cartoon that some of you may know, and fantasizing about the beautiful Chitara, a strong symbol of femininity and power that still resonates with me today. Growing up, those feelings and fantasies didn't change. What changed was my understanding of the world and how others perceived femininity and gender. I grew up in a country where there's a large dichotomy between genders, where social roles go back thousands of years and are very, very strict. Gender is very much seen as binary, male and female. Any deviation from this norm is enough to create anxiety and discomfort in most people, even, God forbid, fear. Another word for fear is the Greek phobos, which is words such as homophobia and transphobia stem from. Exploring my gender was never really an option for me as a child or adolescent. I was given a role since birth based on my physical sex, and I was expected to follow it until the end of my days. And I tried. I really did try to conform and suppress all those feelings, those fantasies, those thoughts that had me questioning who I was, who I really was inside. Growing up in a largely transphobic world, I had no choice but to internalize some of this transphobia myself. I ended up believing those same prejudices that were going against my own nature as a trans person. I hated myself and my weird feelings. I learned that I was wrong, against nature, against God, against society, against my very own family. That I would never be able to get married, to have kids, to even date. It felt like I was cursed and that I needed to hide all those feelings forever and ever. Suppressing my gender questioning feelings wasn't easy. I had to use force. I had to medicate myself using drugs and alcohol. I had to find ways to escape my reality and my body, but that came at a cost. I was self-harming. This may sound familiar to you, as in my experience it applies to a number of us. Unable to accept ourselves and be accepted by the world around us, some of us end up in hiding, but that hiding comes at a cost. In a large US-based study, it was found that over 25% of trans people misused drugs or alcohol. That was directly due to the discrimination they faced because of their gender identity and expression, compared with an average 9% of the general population. What can start out as a coping mechanism for managing life can frequently develop into full-blown addiction, and the consequences of addiction can be really dire and include death. I know because I was there myself. Another terrifying statistic is that a staggering 41% of trans people on a nationwide US survey reported attempting suicide. That is compared to 1.6% of the general population. I mean, the difference speaks for itself. Unemployment, low income, sexual and physical assault are all things that significantly raise the risk factors. Lack of acceptance and stigmatization can also lead to mental health conditions. Research has found that gender-variant people are a lot more susceptible to suffer from clinical depression, anxiety, and somatization of psychological symptoms compared to non-trans individuals. I personally have suffered from depression, anxiety, and psychosis. And today, I know and I can make the links and see how all these were triggered directly and indirectly by transphobia and prejudice that I faced at some point in my life. Having said all this, I feel lucky today. I feel very lucky and blessed to be amongst you here and share some of my story. To have survived life so far is nothing short of a miracle. So how did it work for me? What did I have to do to turn things around? First, I had to become honest. I had to embrace myself for who I was unconditionally. Second, I had to become vulnerable, which today I recognize as one of the greatest assets one can ever possess. A large part of becoming vulnerable is opening up to the idea of asking for help. So the decision was made, but the big question loomed. Who was I? And more importantly, who did I want to be? Discovering myself took a long time and perseverance. I'm still learning things about myself every single day. Self-discovery, I found, is a lifelong journey, and everyone's journey is different. Gathering support from my therapist, my family, my friends, my colleagues, a number of different doctors, as well as my 12-step support groups, I slowly started gathering pace. I started changing my own distorted perception of what it meant to be transgender and who I really was underneath all these years of suppression. Because hating and denying myself and my body was no longer an option, as I was faced with grave consequences, and as mentioned before, even death. Today, I see my decision to come out as trans not as an act of courage, but as an act of survival. And so, I started slowly embracing my hidden and suppressed femininity. I experimented. I went online to try and understand more by meeting others who had similar experiences. I found the courage to come out to my employer at the time, my friends, my colleagues, my family. I transitioned socially and medically over a period of the last 8 years, and today my transition is still very much ongoing. By opening up, asking for help, and reaching out to others, I was doing myself a huge favor. I was creating a strong support network around me that allowed me to slowly internalize the love others were showing me and believe that I was good enough to be loved. That was actually okay. That I was good enough to be amongst you here today, in this room and in this world. It was love that made me ask for guidance and work on a spiritual program of daily maintenance, employing honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness as a basis for all action. And it is love that is guiding me today, the newfound love for myself that allows me to be loving of others too, and to be of service to the world. Because when we know who we are and forgive ourselves and others for all the pain and anguish we had to experience to get to this point, we're opening up to the possibility of service. We're opening up to the possibility of being helpful to others, of not just looking at ourselves as the center of the universe. I discovered that one of the greatest gifts one can experience is that of giving, of helping another human being, of supporting someone in need. When we're able to do that, when we're able to forget ourselves and look outwards to help and support others, we can be sure we're on the right track. And as if by magic, the great gift of love is then returned back to us. In order to love myself, I also had to become aware of my own internalized homophobia and transphobia. In other words, I had to become very familiar with the often implicit biases that I was carrying and that were instilled in me since I was a young child. You might have heard the phrase, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. To me, that applies perfectly to biases. Only by becoming aware of these biases in me am I able to question them and challenge them. For me, this takes daily practice and is never fully complete. I also wanted to talk briefly about visibility. I myself am openly transgender, what I call medium or even high disclosure regarding my trans status, depending on context, of course. I'm also quite aware of my privilege to be visible today. I live in a big city where differences are not just tolerated, but celebrated and respected. I feel mostly safe in my day-to-day interactions. However, that is not the case for a large number of transgender people around the world. Trans women of color, trans sex workers, trans men and women in Africa, in South America, in Asia, Europe, and the US. Trans immigrants like myself. A lot of us don't feel safe to be out, don't feel safe to be ourselves. We risk violence and discrimination, and that is terrible. Currently in the United States, the so-called bathroom bill is asking transgender people to use bathrooms that correspond to our sex at birth. If that was to happen here in London, I would be terrified. I can only just imagine the anxiety and terror that my trans and gender non-conforming brothers and sisters must be facing over there as a result of this. Imagine, just imagine for a moment, your very existence being questioned, not just by people who don't fully understand what gender is all about, and there are many such people in the world, but state law itself saying that it is illegal to use a bathroom of your choice. Would that not invalidate my existence? Would that not tell me that I was somehow wrong, that all the work I had done to accept myself was in vain? Gender is a new frontier that needs to be understood and respected. We need to be very clear about it and about the massive phobias and prejudices that surround gender identity and that fuel such mass hysteria. And that is what makes my ability to be visible today in front of you even more important. I'm being visible for those who cannot be. I'm being visible because I firmly believe that the best way to change society is through exposure. For people to get to know a trans person, to move from a theoretical, fearful understanding of gender variance to the practical, the real. From representation in the media to real-life interactions, authentic, honest, and human. Because the dehumanization of trans identities, misogyny, and all kinds of phobias sit right at the core of so many evils in our world. Orlando being the latest in a series of atrocities fueled by ignorance, hatred, and fear. Coming to terms with who we are is not an easy journey, and is certainly not one that comes without challenges of all kinds. As an openly transgender woman, I wish to carry a positive message today that although things can be tough at times, and I mean really, really tough, they can also get a lot better. In a society where many of the messages we hear every day are about conforming to our jobs when they no longer serve us and our beliefs, conforming to certain ideals when they end up being the opposite of what we stand for today, conforming to society's gender norms when we know that we're somehow gender variant or questioning. My message today is that we don't have to conform. We can unlearn things that no longer serve us and replace them with a greater understanding of ourselves and the world around us. When I'm guided by compassion, acceptance, and love, I find that things click into place. Life flows, and instead of seeking mere happiness, I seek purpose, and that feels a lot more important. I'm going to end on this. In my journey so far, I've realized that sometimes we cannot change the world directly. What we can always change, however, is ourselves. And the world then responds to that and changes as a result. Thank you for listening. It's been a great, great pleasure.